Baruch Hashem, and say l'chaim.
Chaim, Chaim.
Chaim l'bracha. Chaim l'chaim. Okay, Yud Kislev, Tes Kislev, Yud Kislev connected to the Mittel Rebbe. So it's, there are two things. Number one, there are certain heroes and certain things that we have to take out from Tes Kislev, Yud Kislev that we have to learn. That's the whole idea of Farbrengen. The person who speaks is going to shred. It's just, so you need some guy but it's each one has to take out something, and another thing is also a time that amongst ourselves we talk about the Mittel Rebbe, talk about the godless of the Mittel Rebbe, because everyone knows, all Chassidim know the godless of the Mittel Rebbe, but it's always kedai to review and to think that brings out to understand the hafloah, the greatness, as much as it's possible for a human being like us to understand. So I think the first thing I would like to say is to mention a few things in the Mittel Rebbe, which everyone knows, but talk about it with the Mittel Rebbe. Know the Mittel Rebbe, it's that Chassidus was the greatest, but in Sipurim Niroyim, there's a Sefer Sipurim Niroyim written by Rabbi Yankel Kadaner. Yankel Kadaner was a Chassid of the Mittel Rebbe, Chassid that's a Matzetik, and he wrote the Sipurim Niroyim, and he wrote the den. So it's not like stories that people now write down that they heard from somebody who heard from somebody about the Baal Shem Tov story. He wrote it down by Itib Bisman, and he only wrote stories that he was aid to, or he heard from the Bala Maisa. So he writes there, Benegeya, the Mittel Rebbe, that people think, Benegeya, the Mittel Rebbe, that in Chassidus he was, the top. I mean, but in Nigle, the Mittel Rebbe was not so great. But he says there that the learning of the Mittel Rebbe, the Hasmoda, was so great, Pasha the Nigle. He says there was once that Nechemia the Brovner and the Filovich, the different Rabbonim that were talking together with Reb Chaim Avram, the Maril, the Alter Rebbe's brother, and they were talking in Nigle and they were fighting and discussing and they couldn't come to something they couldn't understand. And they said, let's ask the Rebbe. They went to the Mittel Rebbe on the spot. The Mittel Rebbe told them, Pasha the Pshat in Nigle, that they went out of the Kalim. They said this is Mamish. His learning in Nigla was, he tells the story there that the Mittel Rebbe is once on a trip, and it takes up time, and you're busy for whatever he did in Askonas, whatever he did. And on the way back, he Batsim hasn't eaten the whole day, but he told the driver to drive very fast. The wagon driver was driving, and he said, drive fast. And what happened in the middle? He drove so fast that the horse died. And he told him to continue, they changed it, and to continue. And in other words, the way, I don't know if he writes it, but the way I remember, they were thinking maybe he doesn't feel good and he wants to come home. And the Pale finally got to Lubavitch and they got into the house. He ran out of the wagon and he was wearing his coat, his winter heavy fur coat. He jumped out of the wagon, ran into the house, didn't even take off his coat. He ran over to the Shafer, took out a Gemara, and stood a whole night till the morning learning Gemara. In other words, since in this way he was traveling, he didn't have a chance, obviously, to learn Gemara, because he was involved in Askonas. He couldn't wait, Pasha, the Gaguim that he had, Pasha, to learn, and he came and he ran down and he learned Gemara the whole night. So he says that the Nigla, they say that the Mittel Rebbe, it's written already in these, everyone I'm going to say is written in the Svarim of the stories, that the Mittel Rebbe once asked his Shamish, his Gabbai, can you tell me, was sagt die Welt auf mir? What is that? What do they say? So he said, they want to know the truth? I'll tell you the truth. They say, they say that in Chassidus, in Kabbalah, this year the greatest. But in Nigle, not so. So he said to him, you should know, if I would give myself over to Nigle 1 year, just Nigle, ain't gone Kamesi. But he was more in Chassidus. But he says, but otherwise, even his Ge'enes, they say that the Rakachova said, I saw someplace written differently, but I heard from somebody who says he heard it closer to the Rakachova that said, he once spoke about the Alter Rebbe, greatness of the Alter Rebbe. We know the Rakachova, the Alter Rebbe. But then they asked him, what he said, the Mittel Rebbe? So he said that I can't say much because there's not much Nigla written, even though there is a little bit of Nigla Tiskidin for the Mittel Rebbe, but not much. And even that, I don't know if he had it, it was printed later. But he said, but from the Chassidus that he says, that you see that he must have had in his head arteries the thickness of a finger for saying such deep svaras. Now, I heard from somebody else that he said it on the Alter Rebbe from his Kunter Sachren, but I heard from somebody that he said it on the Mittel Rebbe, and he said he can't say because it's nigle, but still you could see from the Chassidus. I remember the Rebbe told over once. Actually, it's interesting to tell over Bechlal. This was Shabbos Pashas Vayetze Yud Kislev Tovshin Chof Beis. And I start making a cheshbon how long ago that is. It's almost 60 years, 59 years ago. Tovshin Chof Beis. I'm still a very young bucket. But there's certain things you remember. And this Farbrengen, I remember it was no one that knew if it was going to be a Farbrengen or not. Like those times, the only time they knew a Farbrengen is going to be Shabbos and Vorchem. And then every time they waited, one of the ceremony was the Rabbi would announce after davening Mustaf, if he would announce when Mincha is, then we know there's not a Farbrengen. But if the Rebbe started walking without waiting for the announcement, you knew there's anyway. So there was Farbrengen, and it's the middle of the winter, so how late can it be? Now by a regular Farbrengen, what was those years especially, Farbrengen lasted about 2 hours. But from 1:30 was the Farbrengen until 3:30 Berech. In the Farbrengen, many times, usually there was a Maimer in the Farbrengen and 2 sichas, 3 sichas. But 1 Maimer and 3 sichas. This Farbrengen, the Rebbe said, he told over that the Alter Rebbe, the Mittel Rebbe was involved, his whole Inyan was Chassidus, ad kedei kach, that there would be even sometimes a Shabbos that he would say Chassidus 3 times. 3 times he would say Chassidus in one Shabbos. And this Farbrengen of Shabbos Pashas Vayetze Tovshin Chof Beis, the Rebbe said 3 Maimorim. There's 3 Maimorim with the Nigun of a Maimer. So there were 2 Sichas and 3 Maimorim. Always there's 1 Maimer and 3 Sichas, something like that. It was Mam Shapel. I remember when we saw, I remember like now, standing there, and the Rebbe all of a sudden say another Maimer. And then later a 3rd Maimer. It was Ad Kedei Kach, that the Rebbe said, when he said then that the Mittel Rebbe in one Farbrengen said 1 Shabbos said 3 Maimorim, he said, and sometimes he would say a Maimer Fartog. Fira Zege Fartog. So after the Rebbe said the 3 Maimorim, we were thinking maybe, just like the Rebbe copied the Mittel Rebbe and said 3 Maimorim this Shabbos, maybe Fartog, the Rebbe is going to say a Maimer. So we came to 770, Fira Zege Fartog. Then Atz Bochrim came to, the Rebbe didn't come. But I'm saying, but it was. So that Farbrengen, leider, there's not really a hanocha from that Farbrengen. There are a few words from there, a few stories that the Rebbe told them from that Farbrengen. So we can look it up. But one of the things, like I was saying, about Benigle, the Rebbe said that the Tzemach Tzedek said on the Mittel Rebbe. And what happened was, the Mittel Tzemach Tzedek didn't want to accept the Messias. And he said, why? It'll take me away time from learning. So they said to the Tzemach Tzedek, and your father-in-law, the Mittel Rebbe, did accept the Messias. And he didn't, like it wasn't bothering him that it didn't take away time from learning. So he said, was gleich der mir zu mein Schwer? How are you comparing me? The Schwer was so much involved that when he came into the shul in Lubavitch, and he walked from one wall, I remember the Lashon said, von dem Wand zum Zweiten, hat durchgetracht a ganze Mesichte. In his mind, he thought a whole Mesichte in Gemara from the wall. And I remember the Rebbe even added, that noch it's not there, but I remember the Rebbe said, and those that were in Lubavitch know that the shul was not that big. The shul, and still, when he went from one wall to the other, it had durchgetracht a ganze Mesichte. So that's the Mittel Rebbe in Nigla. But the Mittel Rebbe in Chassidus, his Weismandacher, the Tzemach Tzedek said that if you will cut his finger, it nicht genken Blut, you won't have blood. What will happen is you will see Chassidus instead of that. And this Inyan started all the way from when he was still a kid. When he was a kid, he was so involved. They're famous Vertlach. You don't find so many Vertlach. I mean, Chassidus Shetif Inyanim from any of the Rabbi when they were kids, like you find by the Mittel Rebbe. The famous one, Lamoshel Atzabeim Kesef Azov, the famous word when he saw some of the elder Chassidim, were a little bit sad. The Parnosa wasn't going, and he was a kid, and he saw them standing there in Ganei Natachton going to Yechidus. So he told them, Atzabeim Kesef Azov, Atzabeim Yitaiched, Loshen Atzvus. Your Atzvus comes from Kesef Azov. things like that. This famous story with the piafkes that he heard from the doctor in the month of Elul. The doctors used to prepare the piafke. Piafkes were these leeches that they used to use to draw blood when they had to draw blood from somebody. And they used to collect it before Elul, because later on in the winter you couldn't get them because they would go into hiding. So he overheard a doctor say, it's tief in Elul, but noch nicht zugekriegt piafkes. We didn't prepare the piafkes. So when he came over and told some of the Chassidim that for, they were sure that he heard it from the Alter Rebbe. He's given a ganze chkire, what is pshat and the whole thing. Later they found out that the Alter Rebbe didn't say he heard it from the doctor. And then the Alter Rebbe actually commented that what we have to work hard on, our children, that comes automatically by us to look at everything in Gashmias that should be a Nero and Aveda, we have to work on it. And our children, the middle by him, it's a Pashazach, he heard this and he told it to them. Anyway, that Russian Yom Kippur, that's a Serenich, that Russian, it was, the tears were there so much based on this. I'm saying it's often the Mittel Rebbe when he was a child. Certainly later, when he was a very young, the Alter Rebbe already appointed him as the
Good.
And not only that, the Rebbe told that Farbrengen of Pasha Vayetze Tovshin Chov Beis that when Chassidim used to come to the Alter Rebbe to ask for a eitzah in Gashmias, he would answer. If they would have eitzah in Ruchnias, he would send them to his son, to the Mittel Rebbe. As got very young, he sent it to him. And what the Mittel Rebbe would do, the Rebbe said he would go into his father before Yechidus and get from him, I don't know, smiche, or get from him an issue that tonight he's going to be able to be machavim to the truth. Every night before he would go in. Once somebody came to him and asked him for an eitz or something, so the Mittel Rebbe said to him, I can't help you because the one you came to hear from or see is not here today. Because the Alter Rebbe wasn't there. So he couldn't get from the Alter Rebbe that confirmation for that. But I'm just trying to bring out that this was what the Mittel Rebbe is from then. So the Mittel Rebbe is known mitzad the inyan of Chassidus. And as we heard from the Rebbe, we just learned in the Siche, that's the inyan of Binah in Chassidus. So besides the greatness is that's a level in Afotzas Hamayones that he was in Marchiv the inyan of Chassidus. There are also, maybe we'll get to that a little later, but there are meifsim that are told of the Mittel Rebbe. Now, like I said, in Sipurim Neiroim, in that Sefer, by the way, it's a Sefer that the Rebbe gave, the Friedrich Rebbe gave the Rebbe during the Rebbe Sheva Brachas to read. And he told him, during Sheva Brachas is not really a time when you really could sit down and learn the Iyun, so he told him to read the Sefer Sipurim Neiroim. So there he goes, a whole bunch of stories about the Alter Rebbe, then he has also all kinds of stories about the Mittel Rebbe, showing the godless of the Mittel Rebbe. And he said that even one of the stories says he was once traveling with the Mittel Rebbe, if I remember correctly. He was traveling with the Mittel Rebbe, and he came to the Chasanya, and the Mittel Rebbe was at Yechidus, whatever, and the Balabosta from the house prepared for him the food. And the Mishores was after the Yechidus was supposed to take the pot of food and serve the Mittel Rebbe. In the morning, he says he saw the lady, Mamish, crying. He said, what's happened? So she said, we had the schus that the Rebbe is in our house. And what I did was, I was machshel him in eating treifas. What do you mean? She said there was 2 pots on the fire or wherever. One was for the Rebbe, and one was for the Goye. The Goyish lady, the cleaning lady, or whatever you call her. By mistake, it got mixed up. And the pot of treifa food went to the Rebbe. So I was machshel the Rebbe with treifas. He came to the Mishoris, and the Mishoris started laughing. He said, what are you laughing? It's not a simple thing. I'll tell you what happened. After the Rebbe finished, and I served him the food, the Rebbe took the soup, I think, and I remember exactly, took it with a spoon and started looking. He didn't want to eat it. And he said he's not going to eat it. And the Rebbe didn't eat the whole day. The Rebbe gave it back, and he said, and the Rebbe told me, and you also shouldn't eat it. You also shouldn't eat it. So the Rebbe didn't either. Go, and he said, go look. And he showed him that pot that was set there was full. No one touched it. So he said, you see from here that the unit inside the koloven. But when they asked the Mittel Rebbe, they said, oh, Rabbi Mephis, that's nicht Mephis. Mephis, he said, when I started taking the spoon, so what happened was, my mind came in Yonim of Hilchas Trefis. So I was thinking, well, why is Hilchas Trefis reingefallen in the cup now? So that gave me an understanding. I said not to eat. But he brings out from this, a lot of things he says there. The Mittel Rebbe's Kapedis, that we know, the Mittel Rebbe's Kapedis. There was a guy who told him, the Rank Gana writes, there was a guy who told him, he said, he heard it from the guy, he was Chavrusa of the Mittel Rebbe. Chavrusa. But then they went their ways. He went whatever he did, and the Mittel Rebbe stayed. Mittel Rebbe learned. And this was all before the Nesias of the Mittel Rebbe, time of the Alter Rebbe. He came, then he once came to Lubavitch. Not to Lubavitch, Ladi, whatever it was, he came. And he went in to see his friend. And he saw his friend was learning Gemara. He saw the Mittel Rebbe learning Gemara. So he saw him learning Gemara. And he was on Daf Yud, I think, or something like that. In the beginning of the Masechta, whichever, I don't know which Masechta. He came in the next day, he came again in, he saw him holding a Daf Mem. So he said to him, it's possible you learned so much. We used to learn together, we never learned like this so much. And the Mittel Rebbe didn't answer. When he went home, I think something happened, a child got sick or something happened to him. And he came running to the Rebbe, to the Alter Rebbe. And he's afraid maybe something he said, maybe there's some kapeda of the Alter Rebbe or something. Nothing. Then the Alter Rebbe says to him, maybe you said something not bekovedik to my son, to the Mittel Rebbe. So no, he's a best friend of mine. Why would I insult him? Why would I do anything? But when he went out, he reminded himself that, yeah, this story that he made like a joke of his learning. So he ran to the Mittel Rebbe and he told him, and the Mittel Rebbe said, yes, and like he bothered him, why are you? And he asked the Mechila, whatever. So the Mittel Rebbe's Kapeda, even then, before the Nesias was. So he says, if you read it, it's very interesting. The Mittel Rebbe is buried in Nezhin. He says in Nezhin, very often they had a magefa, they had a virus, but they laughed it off. They didn't care about it. So they said, well, why? It's a serious thing. So they told him, I guess it's not serious. The moment someone gets it, you go to the tziyad, you go to the ale of the Rebbe, of the Mittel Rebbe, and everything goes away. So this is, other stories that he says about the godless of the Mittel Rebbe. So that's one thing to know about the Mittel Rebbe. Then we have since we're talking about Tes Kislev, which is the Meledis and the Yortzeit. So the Stalkers of the Mittel Rebbe, which everyone knows, and just could I to mention that the Tzemach Tzedek said that such a Stalkers wasn't there from the Rashbi's time. Besides that, by the Tzemach Tzedek was the Mittel Rebbe was the same day of his Meledis, which the time of the Chumash and those days, it happened by every tzaddik that they passed away on the day of their Yemeledis. But later, that's not. For some reason, even though the idea fits, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mamalish Nefesh Shel Tzaddikim fits now too for a tzaddik, but it's not begilui for some reason. Not by the Mittel Rebbe, this was mamish begilui. That's one thing. But besides that, the last word that he said was the word Chaim, and by the Rashbi, it says Azayah that he finished this, and Shama left him when he said the word Chaim. So it's mamish the same thing. And the way it says in Beis Rebbe all about the stalkers of the Mittel Rebbe, that the Mittel Rebbe was already like mamish kemat geises, and one doctor says to the other doctor, "I'll show you something. I'll give him permission to say Chassidus. You'll see what will happen." So he walked over, whispered to him that he asked permission to say Chassidus. He got up and he became mamish like because that was his whole life. Anyway, so that's Benegay the Mittel Rebbe. The Iker Rebbe was in the Gate soon. This Benegay the Mittel Rebbe is his inyan was Chassidus, and the Mittel Rebbe said it's a gewunschen, like we've just learned in the Sikha. It's a gewunschen that when two younger light meet, what should be the discussion? Here the Rebbe said the lashon atik va'arich. That's one lashon. Some places the same idea. It says that's a gewunschen. You should speak about Yichud Ilah, Yichud Tator. They say that the Rebbe once, when he quoted this word to the Mittel Rebbe, he said, "When ich wünsch sach, as in Geleit treffen sach, they should talk about how to be Mekar of another Yid, or about somebody. I don't know the lashon, but it's the same idea. But the Mittel Rebbe, the Iker was Chassidus. And the stress of Chassidus, Chassidim, the matzav of Chassidim in the time of the Mittler Rebbe, mitzad learning Chassidus, was top, more than in the time of the Alter Rebbe, more than the time before. It was even known, the Mittler Rebbe's Jungelite, and these are young people, they're not the elder Chassidim. The Mittler Rebbe's Jungelite were in a high madrege, and Chassidim used to say that in the time of the Mittler Rebbe, they didn't need Mashiach. And then the Kuda was, why? Because the union of Mashiach is V'niglo Kved Hashem V'ro Kol Boser Yachdav Kipi Hashem Tibir. The union of Mashiach is Gilui Alikus. They were so much involved in Chassidus that they had Gilui Alikus. Learning Chassidus and understanding Chassidus is Gilui Alikus. I'm going to explain it just for a second. People think Gilui Alikus means shine tarop a light. So Eir and Sof, no, everyone knows Lakus is Eir and Sof. So there's a certain light that comes down in the Welt, and it's Eir and Sof. So a person by somebody who's doing Gilui Eir and Sof, it means that if he has some kind of feelings, it comes down there, that's not the Pshat Gilui Eir and Sof. Gilui Lakus means, B'shasilek Sachoba mentioned in his mind the truth of the Emeskite of the Eibishter, the fact that Ein Eid Milvadeh, there's nothing but Mitanemes, not just words, lip service, yeah, we all say nothing Eibishter. There's nothing but Eibishter, but something, only a little bit, only me and Eibishter. But so when select Sachob Mitanem, that you really, really, really understand and feel Eined Muvade, that's Gilei Lakus. So when it says Mashiach will come, that means everybody in the world, and not only people called Bosar, will recognize the Emeskite of the Eibishter. In the time of the Mittler Rebbe, the Chassidim were in such a madrege that they pushed everyone, those that were the real Chassidim, recognized the Emeskite of Lakus. So the word was that they didn't need Mashiach. Avada, that's not Kipshute, they didn't need Mashiach. States of Mashiach will come and be different, and not only that, the Welt needs Mashiach, and the Tachas HaKavon needs Mashiach. So, but it's an expression. The expression is that by them, was Tachuftum and Mashiach will come, they had it, Mizgelegen Chassidus, and they learned it, Mamash, this was by them, and they take had Gilui Lakus. Or something like Gilui Anasham. I think I mentioned once, another Farbrengen is that once the Raditcher came to the Alter Rebbe, and he came with a chassid, and he told the Alter Rebbe, this chassid of mine has Gilui Lio, and the B'dome Kletzker was standing on the side, Davenik Shmonesre, holding by Sim Sholem, and the Alter Rebbe said to Raditcher, when their chassid, Shas is holding by Sim Sholem, is laughing at his Gilui Lio. And the Chassidim who chazed over, they heard it from Rav Shmuel Greinem in Lubavitch. I heard it from all the Chassidim. All the older Chassidim used to tell that story. That they heard it from Rav Peretz. So from Rav Shmuel Greinem, I heard from Rav Peretz, I heard from Rabbi Jacobson, and they all. And Rav Shmuel Greinem was Masbir. What's Gilui Lio? Gilui Lio is a Gilui L'mayla. Lio comes to you fine, and you have to be zeicha for it. It's not so poshut. You have to be zeicha for it. But when you have Gilui Anashama, so what's Gilui Lio? Gilui Lio is only a schus. There are many stories of people who, because of a certain act that they did, were zeicha to Gilui Lio. Part of the people, they weren't Palamadrege, but because they did some serious nefesh act. Famous stories, guy was not even normal. It's a dreiter, and he did something, and he had Gilui Lio. Gilui Lakus is not a Gilui that you're zeicha to a Gilui. Gilui Lio is a madrege that you recognize the truth. So that's, some places we call it Gila Neshama, because the Neshama is Megala Lakus. So the way they said over, Shmuel Greinem said, he said, V'shas estate Sim Sholem, he's laughing at this Gila because he has Gila Neshama, which is Gila Lakus. And the Chassidim in the Mittler Rebbe, Poshet, had what we say, Gila Lakus, because they were involved in Chassidus constantly. So the union of the Mittler Rebbe, and we talk about the Mittler Rebbe, and every time there's a certain Sibbe for a Farbrengen or talk, it has to be that Nakuda. See, when it comes to Lauf Nissen, Gimel Tammuz, we talk about the Rebbe, and there's all these inyanim, but all these inyanim, all the Rabbeim are part of what we have to do. It all has to go through the way it goes to the Rebbe, because the Rebbe taught us, and the Rebbe gave us, and the Rebbe told us, but the Rebbe, we have to go through. So when we talk about the Mittler Rebbe, this is the representation of the epitome of learning Chassidus. They say, just saying things that come to my mind, the Mariel, the Tzemach Tzedek's son, the Mariel, Kopister, was a big chassid of the Mittler Rebbe. He was an Einik of the Mittler Rebbe, and he was old enough in the time of the Mittler Rebbe, so he was really mekusher to the Mittler Rebbe. And they used to call him, what did they call him? Not the Horb. Call him the, something like,
Stender?
huh?
Stender?
The Stender. Oh, that's the word. The Stender. They used to call him the Stender. So his brothers asked him, why are you called the Stender? He didn't want to tell him. Finally, he told him that the Mittel Rebbe would sometimes say Chassidus, he'd have to have something to lean on. So he would bend down and he would lean on him. They asked him, for that you called. It happened once, I think he said, if I remember correctly, 18 hours. He said Chassidus on him. So he was, because the Mittel Rebbe was the whole union of the union of Chassidus. The player by the gay, the Maril, he was a chassid of the Mittel Rebbe, but the Tzemach Tzedek once went on in the Sia to different cities to speak Chassidus and things. So he took along the Maril, his son. And when he came back, the Rebbe asked him to give him a report what happened. So he says, through this Nesiya, Merzuki Kumen ein chassid. I got one chassid extra now. That's who? Unser Maril, our son the Maril. Because when he saw what's going on with the Tzemach Tzedek, he became a chassid of Tzemach Tzedek. But that's the Mittel Rebbe. Why? Because this was the union of Chassidus. So for us, when we talk about the Tes Kislev, Yud Kislev, the Mittel Rebbe, what is it supposed to be me'erer in us? Supposed to be me'erer in us this Nekuda of learning Chassidus and the oplik of Chassidus, and realizing what it is. Because there's so many things we have to do. If we learn Chassidus, we learn Nigla, we have to do Mitzvah, we have to do everything. But we have to focus, after all, Chassidus Chabad. And the Rebbe didn't take away the union of learning Chassidus. The Rebbe pushed learning Chassidus. But on top of that, he didn't let, more and more and more. But that Nekuda has to be stressed. Sometimes you have to stress other things. Sometimes you have to stress this. So it comes to Yud Kislev, the Mittel Rebbe. His whole focus was the union of learning Chassidus and the opleg from Ein Eid Milvade. And that's what we have to focus on. And I think like this, I don't know if it's true. In Darges of Aveda, certain things that they had in the Molech Chassidim, even Chassidim in Lubavitch, not in the Alter Rebbe's time, Mittel Rebbe, we're not shaykhs to it. All the Aveda and Iskafi, all this, we're not shaykhs. We got to do it in such a small amount, but in the understanding of the emeskite of the kus, that we're kalim for. The problem would be that we understand that lav davke, we act upon it because we have a yetzer hara, and that's something that we have to do. But the level of understanding, even though we know that Rabbi said, the Rabbi Rashab said, and the Friedrich Rebbe, that if you have a scholar of Chassidus without Aveda, is going to shvert, it's nothing, it's whatever. But I'm not talking now about the part of Aveda, but talking the opleg of what we learn in Chassidus at Ein Eid Milvade, which is what the Nekud of Chassidus is, that we're shaykhs to understand. We're shaykhs to understand it. As a matter of fact, after having the Rebbe's biyurim, all the biyurim from, we have it in a way that we could understand, it's lower down to us that we could be able to understand it. So as much as the Rebbe says that there's a bina by the Mittel Rebbe that was mamshich from Chochma to bina to lower Madrege and brought it down Lamato, every generation it went lower. And by the Rebbe, by us, it came down very low. So the understanding of what Chassidus wants us to uplift, which is the ganze Tachlis. If someone will ask you in a word, in a nutshell, tell me what is Chassidus about? What is Chassidus about? Hundreds of foreign Chassidus, what is it all about? If you give me a one word, the word is going to be the upleg of Ein Eid Milvadi. That's what it is. In Azabir, and from this angle, from that angle, on this posik, on that posik, different things. But it's all one thing. So that nekuda of the upleg of that, there's only one thing is the Eibishter, and everything is not. In Havone v'Asoge, in Askola, I think it's possible for us. Especially, I'm saying, if you learn with the Rebbe's Biyurim, which brings it down. And this is what we have to take out. And I'm not saying it to anybody, obviously. I mean, everyone, I don't have to bavon this here. I'm just saying the Inyan the way it is. Maybe if I speak enough, it'll affect me too. Like the Rebbe Rashab used to say sometimes, the Rebbe said in Farbrengen, so I'm saying, but that's what Inyan of Chassidus. And if you learn Chassidus, you get to understand that. And I tell you, it's interesting that some of the Polish Chassidim who are shaykhs to learn Chassidus Chabad, they chapazuv. I remember once I was in shul, Shabbos was a kiddush, and there was a few non-Lubavitcher guys with Steinlach and this. And we're talking this and that. So one guy turns around to me, and the other guy said he's right. Fine, also good. I said, about here, about there. They know that's what Chassidus Chabad is all about. I know sometimes you deal with these non-Lubavitcher became Lubavitcher Chassidish Eden. Like them, they know this is what Chassidus is all about, and we have to do it. And when we learn Chassidus, Lek Sachot Emes, and when you learn, if you don't learn, it doesn't. No, Purim Toshin Tez Zion, famous Farbrengen Purim Toshin Tez Zion. What happened then? In Eretz Yisrael, the Polekan had a Farbrengen. Somebody took it to kislev. I think it was kislev. And those times, some Bochum from Snagish Yeshivas came to his Farbrengen. And he said something which probably, if you'd be politically correct, he shouldn't have said it. But he did say it. It was not long, I think, after the Chazanish passed away. And another kid, a young Bocher, Lubavitcher Bocher, who learned in Fatmimim, also passed away. So he was Farbrengen. And the Rebbe said, when he told over this, he said he was Lachar, Ketev Leibel Bayoyin. He was Asach Mashke. And he said that they both went up Lamaila. And finally, when they came to one Heichal, this Godel B'Yisrael tried to get in and they wouldn't let him in. But this kid who learned Temchet Mimim, for him to open the door. And when he got in, so that guy is Charangechapt. That's what he said. So the Rebbe of Farbrengen said that, he didn't say these words, but somebody said something like this. So he said, if you listen to, I wasn't there, that's Farbrengen, it's not Zion, but if you listen to the tape, Mitzayches zu sagen, der Eretz Yisrael gepotscht ist reich geworden. The Israeli mail became rich. So many letters were sent, so many post stamps were used. I got so many letters from people like Tochen, how could you say this guy is a Godel B'Yisrael? How could you say it? And the Rebbe explained, he said, I'll explain it. And he explained it based on the Gemara. The Gemara says that the La'osid is the Eibishter will make for every tzaddik a chuppah. And chuppah means a madrega. He's going to be involved in a certain madrega. And everyone will be burnt by the chuppah of somebody else, of the other guy. What's the pshat? Why will each one be burned? Because each one will be in a place where he is shaychus to. Someone else who's not shaychus to that inyan can't get in there. If it gets in there, it'll burn him. But since every tzaddik wants to have more and more, so he's going to nevertheless try to get in and get burned. Abi should be able to go in there. But why will he get burned? Because he's not shaychus to go in because it's not his inyan. So the Rebbe said the same thing here. A person who didn't learn chassidus, there is a inyan lamaila. We know the truth. The inyan lamaila chassidus, and someone who learned chassidus has his chuppah, has a place where he could go. Someone that didn't learn, and the Rebbe even used the lashon, listen, that he didn't learn not because he didn't know about it, he just didn't hold of it, so he can't get in. And he was referring to him that he didn't learn chassidus, so he can't get in. He wasn't chas v'sholem knocking him or something. He has his own inyanim. But this nakuda that this kid from Temchet Mimim got, he doesn't have it, and he can't get in. And nevertheless, he'll try to get in. That's why it says they'll get burnt. You know you'll get burned, but you try it. So he tried to get in. Because if you learn chassidus, there is something that's there that if you don't learn, you're missing. And this is every kid in Temchet Mimim. A kid who learns in Temchet Mimim and just starts learning Tanya. If you learn and they teach him, the first thing that he legt sich auf him, even as a young kid, is as nicht in Welt. That's legt sich auf. That's nicht in Welt. And that's what Chassidus says. And that's a pashtus. Certain things that are pashut if you learn Chassidus, which if you don't learn, they're not pashut. In the Maimer Chassidus, in the Reb Marasha Maimer, it says, how do you know Asidah Welt? Maybe the Welt is Anachizas Anayim. Maybe the world is an imagination. It says, how do I know Asidah Welt? The Torah zog Breishis Bore Lekimas Hashemayim V'Zoretz. It's only from the Torah. Otherwise, maybe Taka nicht fucking Welt. And there's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if a person does magic, so you chayiv misa. But there's another type of magic which is called imagination. It's called you do things which is an illusion. So if it says like this, if you make through magic melaket kishuyim that melons will be collected, And if it's real magic, you're chayiv misa. But if it's only an illusion, you're potter. The question is, if the ganze Welt is an illusion, then even when you really do it, it's an illusion. Is that from the Mishnah, Asida Welt. So, but by Etzem, wie ist gelegt, if you learn Chassidus, even the beginning, elementary, as nicht in Welt. If you don't learn Chassidus, it works the opposite. You know what happens if you don't learn Chassidus? They once asked a guy, how do you know Asida Eibishter? You know what he answered? Weil der Rambam paskent azay. The Rambam says, in the beginning, Yeseda, V'amud HaChochmah, Sheyesh HaMotzer Rishon. So the Rambam paskent Asida Eibishter. And the Neisa Kelim, the Ravid, and the Radvaz, and the Kesev Mishnah, and the Makshim, no one argues. And the klal in Rambam is that if the Neisa Kelim don't argue, Asim and they're maskim. So all the poskim are maskim Asida Eibishter. Veis von Asida Eibishter. And that's the difference. If you learn Chassidus, Veis von Asida Welt, weil sie steht in Teire. And by others, find the Veis von Asida Eibishter, weil sie steht in Teire. So this is the nekuda that we have to take out. Learn Chassidus, what's the chageleg by the Chassidim. So not in say madrege, but in understanding. If you really learn Chassidus, people like us can understand and zachopleg them. So Eba Zevet Takasha. So why aren't you a tzaddik if you really know it? I have a big Yetzer Hara, and I can't help it. I can help it this, but we're not in that madrege. But the opleg, the seichel shabodover, it's there. Chassidim used to say, if you learn Sharichas V'Amunah, so the third Perek of Sharichas, he explains this inyan that's nicht in Welt. The ganze Welt is bottled to and soft, like the Eir in the Moyer, very weird. Then the Perek finishes off, so we have to understand, according to this, how is there a Welt? And in the next Perek, he starts off to be Mavaya to answer. Samod Nezach, finish a Perek in the middle of a Kasha. Kasha is nicht in Welt. Eba Zevi Azeh is da Welt. So what they used to say is Amol, it's like this. By Chassidim, they knew that we don't learn Chkiras Svarim. Chkiras Svarim is philosophies, even from great people, which is Sveik Kashas and the Eibishter and Masbir. Why shouldn't you learn it? Because it's very possible that, first of all, you might learn, understand the Kasha, and then not understand the Teretz. What's going to happen? You'll be left on Apikeres. You'll have Sveikis in the Munah because you left with the Kasha. Another thing they would say is, imagine a person learns Ashtikal in the Sefer, and he learns the Kasha on the Munah Devish. He learns the Kasha. And it's late, decides to go to sleep. Tomorrow I'm going to learn the Teretz. The meantime, a whole night, he's sleeping as an Apikeres. A whole night he's sleeping with the Kasha. So that's why some people, what they used to do is they used to learn the Teretz and then the Kasha. They learn the Teretz, and the Kasha already know the Teretz. They even brought a remez. We say in davening, then we say Mikil should be the opposite. Me is a question. Who's like our God? The answer should be no is like our God. How can we learn the answer before the Kasha? So the same thing, we learn the answer before the Kasha. But the reason why we don't learn otherwise is because we don't want to be left over at night to sleep with Shilas in the Munah, Sveikis in the Munah. That's the reason that Alter Rebbe finished the Perek with a kasha. Why? Because usually when you finish a Perek, you stop, you're mafsik. So what will happen? Person will learn it, come to the end of the Perek, he'll have a kasha. And the Teretz will learn tomorrow. So what's going to be? That throughout the night, he'll be sleeping with a kasha. What's going to be the kasha? No. Such a kasha doesn't really matter if a person goes to sleep and has this kasha. So, because if you learn Chassidus, you don't have the kasha, but you know there's an Eibishter, and that's nicht in Welt. It's ugly like nicht in Welt. So that's what is the heroic, or what we have to think about when we learn Chassidus, to learn Mitanemes. And then also, when you teach Chassidus, then you could teach it to other people also. I'm saying, Agam, it sounds like you're talking about Haim Adreges, Oplik from the Lakus. I'm not talking about Oplik of Lakus, but the understanding of what it says. There's a Sikha from the Rebbe, interesting Sikha, Pashas Breishis. on the first posik, says Breishis Bora Lakim Hashemayim V'Soretz. So Rashi starts off by saying, Ein Kosov Zeh Eimer Ela Dorsheni. Just learning the posik Breishis Bora Lakim itself tells you have to darshan the pshat. And what's the drash? The drash is that Bishvil Beis Reishis, that the Eibush created the world for two things called Reishis, which is Yidden and Eibush and Torah. That's how you have to drash in the posuk. And he starts off, Eina Kosav Eimer El Dersheni. You must, in other words, the posuk itself says you drash. Then Rashi continues. If you're going to want to darshan, learn the pshat of the posuk, this is the pshat. The pshat is that when the Eibush created the world, whatever. The Rebbe asked an interesting shaila. If the Rashi says that you could, if you wanted, you could say pshat, how does Rashi start off by saying that the posuk, you could, you must dash in the posuk. No, we must say a drash. The pshat is not good. When he says right away, there is a pshat. And the second shaila, if there is a pshat, why doesn't he say that first? Every time when there's a pshat and the drash, first is pshat, then the drash. So the Rebbe teach, mamish, when you learn the posuk, Breishis Bora L'Kimas Hashemayim V'Soretz, the Eibush created the world. The first zugang is Eina Kosev Eimer El Dersheni. Nishtokin, there's no such thing as Poshet Avelt. The Eibush created the world, and that's what it is. Right away, when you know that there's a Velt, you have to know Dersheni, you have to darshan B'Shvil Yisrael B'Shvil HaTorah. That the Velt Be'etzem is not a Metzias. It's only a Metzias because of Yidden and the Torah, which is because of the Eibush there. Then you could say you could be mamshed that there's a pshat of Velt, and in Velt you be mamshed this. But this is the way we darshan. The Ein Akos Ein El. There's no other way. There is a pshat, but that's not it. It's no other way. You gotta darshan that there's nishtokin Velt, and that's the lesson we have to take from Yud Kislev, Tes Kislev, Avada, Yutas Kislev Avada. That's the union of Chassidus Bechlal. But from the Mittel Rebbe, it's not so much the learning Chassidus as much as the ligen Chassidus. And that's for us. I don't know what the Madregas we have, but in the understanding what Chassidus is. So, Chaim, and take a little bit to heart this Nakuda of what Yud Kislev, Tes Kislev, the Mittel Rebbe. I heard from, I remember some of the Farbrengen that we used to hear from the Elter Chassidim. See, now we're already talking in the year Tovshin Peyala. We're talking about the year Tovshin Chof Beis and Chof Alev. Those years, the Elter Chassidim who were in Lubavitch, and they I once heard from, I don't know if it was a Peretz or maybe for somebody else, that by the Rabbeim, the Mittel Rebbe was very chaviv. That's what one of them used, more chaviv than the other Rabbeim. It was a special chviris to the Mittel Rebbe. The Mittel Rebbe was something, to us, who's there, like we just heard on the video from the Rebbe, who's there to measure the Rabbeim one to another? But something there, something in the Mittel Rebbe was something, that's what he said, something special. And he said it over in the Chassidim, Alter Chassidim, that by the Rabbein, the other Rabbein, the Mittel Rebbe was something special. And this is all because the Etzem, the Kud of Chassidus is by the Mittel Rebbe. He brought the Spash of Chassidus, like we said before, the Afotzim and Chutz, there was a Dargi in Chutz that came from the Mittel Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was Mekudas, and the Mittel Rebbe is Pashtus. I remember there's a Sikha in Chelik Hey that the Rebbe says there on the posik of this week's Pasha, Gal Eidazeh. Gal says in Siddur like Beimer, Gal is like Lamed Gimel. This is the pile that Yaakov made between him and Lavan. So the Rebbe teaches that on the Mittel Rebbe, that there is a mechitza between Nigla and Pnimius, but it's a mechitza made not of a wall, but a pile of stones. Pile of stones means that you could take it apart. If wall, you can't. It's a wall. It means sometimes you could. And when you have to, you're able to take it apart. Like Rasha says, that he says, we can't cross over L'Roa, but L'Prakamatya, you could. But the Mittel Rebbe also, he crossed over, and there's a mechitza, even by the Alter Rebbe, there were certain dargas in Chassidus that the Alter Rebbe wasn't Megala. As much as the Alter Rebbe was Megala, the Yesod of Chassidus, but the Rebbe says that certain things that he wasn't Megala. Actually, this fits, I don't know if it has connection, but it fits to, they say that the Alter Rebbe said once, that all the inyonim that he said, all the mamorim, everything he's saying, is als from the Magid, based on the Magid, and als from the Torahs of the Magid by the first Suda of Shabbos. I guess from all the Shabbos in the first Suda. And from them habe ich noch echt Peck und Peck. And even from that, I have so much more to say. But from the other two Sudas, I didn't even start saying. So the Alter Rebbe had, but it wasn't Megala. So there means there was supposed to be a Mechitza. Just like in Gemara, it says there's a Mechitza between Nigla and Nister. And the Rashbi, so to speak, crossed over that Mechitza because he was supposed to. So the Mittel Rebbe also crossed over a Mechitza, even the Mechitza of the Alter Rebbe. And the Rebbe, and the Sikha, the way it was given in, I remember this was Chilik Hey, made in Topshan Lamed or Lamed Aleph. So the way it was written was the Alter Rebbe was, his gave Teire in the Eifen of the Kude, and the Mittel Rebbe is his Pashtas. I remember I saw the Ksav, I was a little bit involved in, even Rabbi wrote the Sikha. So I saw that Rebbe was Magia, and the Rebbe added, it said there that the Alter Rebbe gave, said Chassidus ben Eifish on the Kude, and the Rebbe added another word in the Kude. The first glance when I saw it, what do you mean the Kude? Chapsach. He says that Eifish on the Kude means that the whole Chassidus is on the Kude. There's no, his Chassidus was in the Kude, and the Kude, and the Kude, and the Kude. The old Inyonim that you said were in the Nekudas Dik Eifim. He said many Inyonim, but in the Kude, another Nekuda. And the Mittel Rebbe, that was the Inyan of his Pashtas, that the Inyan was his Pashtas. So the Inyan that, what's the Chilik in the Kuda and his Pashtas? What's the Chilik in Kuda? Etzem and Gilui. We learned before Etzem. Etzem is inside you. It's the etzem of you, but it's not that you feel it, not that's out. And his pashtas is his galus. His pashtas that it's there, you feel it. The Mittel Rebbe's inyan was that the chassidus will durchnehmen and you should feel it. And if we're here on Yud Kislev, Tes Kislev, Yud Kislev, that's what we have to think about. Each one in his way, in his level, and take it along with us for Tes Kislev or whatever we're going to say. So maybe we should say L'chaim, and maybe we'll try sing another nigun. Maybe someone else will want to say something afterwards. So L'chaim, L'chaim.
Chaim.
Fine.
Oh, you put on another nigun. Frankfurter, maybe you say something. Want to say something, maybe? Okay. Rabbi Frankfurter, are you saying something?
Well, Rabbi Biston is on with the microphone on, so let Rabbi Biston.
Oh, Rabbi Biston, okay.
Shopiro, Rabbi Frankfurter, and Rabbi Shopiro for arranging this Sikha. A beautiful thing, and we have to thank the Rabbi Shalom that we have a Zoom, because they used to corrected like the Rebbe said, created the Zoom so we could Farbrengen. So I just want, by Mittel Rebbe, I remember Rabbi Shopiro Farbrengen many years ago. He said that when the Mittel Rebbe used to write Chassidus on his table, so there's Meshoros Shamas, had to put the next piece of paper, and sometimes he would miss, so some of the words would come out on the Stender. That even the Stender was full of Chassidus. That's how much Chassidus that he wrote, and he said that he wrote so fast that a person's mind can't even think the way he used to write. Listen, the Mittel Rebbe was Taka, the Bina who exploded this. I had a question after Shopiro. So how come was the Maril was Taka Chosid of the Mittel Rebbe and not of his father, of the Tzemach Tzedek? Not later when he recognized him. How come?
Adarabbe, if he was a real chassid of the Mittel Rebbe, to change over, and it is a different style, it's very hard. So somebody whose his kashrus is not so deep. So now I'm to him. But if the kashrus nem durch ad esem nefesh, it's you could work on it. It takes time to work on it till you really nem das durch. Because sometimes some people have such a deep understanding that haino hach and b'meila it's not changing. But b'derech klal, it's very hard. If it's a real kashrus, very hard.
I have to say,
time, but eventually.
I'm going to go off a tangent for a second on what you just exactly said here now. So the tangent is I'm going to go off. I don't really, I know it's far brain, but there's some Lubavitchers that go to other kreisen because you can't speak to the Rebbe today. But I believe if you have a skashis to the Rebbe, you can't look anywhere in any other waters. There's only one place. We have the Mokor, and the Mokor finds a way to answer you. And we know the answers come today just as quick as they came before. Before it was B'diba B'ksav, and today the Rebbe puts into our machshava exactly the brachas that we have to do. So we don't have to look at any other place. No, they go to Israel, they go to this guy. We don't eggs gain. We have the Rebbe, just like if you have a skashus, which Chassidim have. If you learn Chassidus, you learn the Rebbe Sichas. There's no other way. So we just want to be more that we have to be stick to it. So the Mittel Rebbe was, when he said they should Farbrengen and Mayom Halula, which is Yud Kislev, and he was Nifter Chagagula, but his Yom Halula was a day before, passed away a day before, and a year later the Chassidim had a command for the Rebbe, they have to Farbrengen, and the Rebbe gesagt, was da freilich sein. So they sang it in a niggin that the Rebbe told us we have to be happy, but really they weren't happy. But since they had a command from the Rebbe, so we have a command from the Rebbe to do Mivtzoyim, to learn Chitas, to learn Rambam, and to do Mivtzoyim, and to do all these things. So I'll tell you, today we had a wedding in the shul over here, a Frankfurter, God bless him, and there's a bunch of workers over here, and they were speaking Hebrew. So a bocher comes over to me and says, these guys put on tefillin. I'm sitting in the Chabad, and I make sure everybody walks to my Dal Lamas. doesn't get away with not putting on film, but it's ready to ski already. He wasn't going to bother. These Bachim pulled him in and wrapped him with film, so it was like the ski time already. I was having Mincha Shul, 5:23, 5:24. They wrapped him film. So I got to say, the Bachim have a koch that even after the ski, he was doing the ski, let's say, just like by Erev, we're learning Erev now. In Rambam, it says, even though Ben Shmoshes, you can make it, right? So you can put a film Ben Shmoshes also, I think. These guys do the Rebbe's, the Mekushit to the Rebbe, maybe without a bracha, but you can put them on. I know once there was when I was in 770, so there was a Bach in my class who forgot to daven Shachris, and they went over to, I think, either the Shalom Rozov or to Rabbi Mentlik, and asked him for a tikkun. He remembered that Bosh Shkia. So he said I should put it on now at night, but I should obviously not to make a bracha. Just put them on, say Shema, take them off. So in other words, there is an Inyan to do it Shkia after Shkia, only as I guess as a remembrance. I shouldn't come to it. It shouldn't happen to anybody. But I remember the bracha still till today who he is. It's like a guy, such a guy, Lamdin and everything, and it could happen. Anyways, we have to follow the Rebbe's ways. We have the Mittler Rebbe taught us the Bina, and the Rebbe taught us everything else. Put everything together, and we have so much. We have such a well, a kval of Chassidus. That we can just learn the regular Chassidus from the Rebbe. Not to be say anything else, but I'm saying the Rebbe's Chassidus is very important. And I think what you're doing with Likutei Sichos, Rabbi Leibel, the whole world is doing it, is Poshet bring the world closer to the Rebbe's Chassidus. And even though Likutei Sichos, you want to say something simple, but it's Professor Rosen.
Not simple.
What?
Not so simple.
I know it's not so simple, but once when I was 14 years old and I forgot who I was learning Chassidus with in Bedford, and then I can't remember who. Anyways, so they asked me if I learned Chassidus. So I said, of course, I learned my father Chassidus. Was lernst du? I said, I learned Likutei Sichos. That's a garnish. But then there was only Chelik Alpha Beis Gimel out. That's not Chassidus. I was like a bit taken back by it, but if that's what they said, I guess you got to learn my Morim. So, of course, Sichos is not so simple. Professor Rosenblum, who was Baal Tshuva of the Rebbe, who was the biggest math professor in America, so he used to stay by my Babel home. So, anyways, so he used to learn the Rebbe Sichos. He learned Yiddish, learned the Sichos. So we used to eat with him Shabbos afternoon. We used to eat together after Farbrengen. So he tells me, he says, I was a bach then, the young fella. He says, I learned the Rebbe Sichos once, and then when I learned it a second time, I didn't understand it the first time. And then when I learned it a third time, I can't imagine how deep it goes. We think it's simple, it's in Yiddish and it's simple, but it's so deep. And he was a kopmensch. Every time I learn it, I see how much deeper and deeper. I know I'm going off topic, but just was on my mind. Anyways, l'chaim, Rabbi Shopiro, we all love you, and thank you very much for bringing the Sichos closer to us. And it was many people teach it, but you're my favorite, which I tell you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I see the list grew now. Can you hurry? You have a lot of people on tonight. I just looked before, 74 people. Maybe it's your Farbrengen. Anyways, I'm out. I give it over to the chairman. Shkoyach.
Rabbi Frankfurter now. Thank you. Yasha Kiyach.
Chaim. There's another 50 or more people on YouTube. It's not just this.
Okay.
There's people that watch it later, whatever different time zone. But just one story that I heard today to follow up to what Rabbi Bistan was saying. But how the Rebbe answers. So with the COVID and some sort of unemployment, or not having to go to shul, shurim and taking different places. So I started a project, and I'm interviewing French-speaking shluchim throughout the world. And I discover every time different shluchim in different places, and in Africa, in South America, obviously in Europe, and Eretz Yisrael, different shluchim, and I do that by charge with Balabatim, the French people, so they get to discover shluchim in interesting places. So that's the idea. So today I had an interview with a Gurevich, Mendel Gurevich, originally from France. He's on a shlich in Offenbach in Germany. It's a city near Frankfurt. And he was telling me a story that happened, that was part of the interview, that they had a winter camp a few years ago. And the winter camp was supposed to happen, or really was not supposed to happen. But winter break was about 3 weeks after they just had a baby. And his wife was usually the one to take care of the camp, and she was not up to it. And they were tired and not in the mood or whatever it was, and they weren't necessarily going to make the camp. So they had a boss from the community. They asked them, what's with the camp? What's going on with the camp? So whatever. Once he asked already, so they said, okay, we'll put something together. So they put something together, and Thursday before the camp was about to start the following Monday, they had 4 kids registered. And being that they really, to begin with, they were not exactly excited, and with the student, 4 kids, it really was not, they were less than enthusiastic about it. So they wrote to the Rebbe. It was after Gimel Tammuz. His wife, the Shlech said his wife wrote to put a letter in the Igros. And there was a letter about camp, that you have to do camp, and it's kedai even for 1 child. It's kedai. So fine. So they went ahead with 4 kids. Baruch Hashem said they're over. By the time the camp started was the following Monday, they had over 20 kids. But there was 1 kid over there that really caught on. A kid called Alex, and he really got into the spirit, and they really got excited. And so excited that a few weeks later they were going to have a trip to Eretz Yisrael. So he told me that was actually the last trip that was this past February. So the camp was about a year ago, the winter break about a year ago. And so the trip for last February was the last trip that they did, and then was Purim, and that was COVID. So anyway, so the kid really got excited, but a few weeks later they were going to have the trip to Eretz Yisrael. But the trip was full, and that kid really got into it, got really excited, wanted to join the trip, but he couldn't make it. The trip was for bar and bas mitzvah. Kids that were going to be bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah for that year, so they were going to a trip. All of different Chabad Shluchim. It says Rabbi Benny Wolf Shalom was part of the trip, and it was sponsored by forgot the exact term, Vad Rabbonim of Chabad of Europe, so some Chabad Rabbonim organization, forgot the exact title. In any event, so the kid wanted to very much join, but there was no room. It was full, and that's it. It was tripped that the tickets to Israel, they couldn't make it. At the last minute, they had 1 kid that couldn't travel, got sick or something like that, so they had a spot open. They called the mother. There's an opening. The child went on that trip. And so the shlich told me they were making a big shturim about, because it's about bar and bas mitzvah, but the Yom Holodes, about a birthday, to make a big deal about it. And they told the kids all about the birthday. And the kids were checked out the Jewish birthday, and it turned out to be that kid Alex, that really got excited, his birthday, his bar mitzvah, the real day of this bar mitzvah, which he didn't know the Jewish date, fell on the day they arrived to Eretz Yisrael. So, and that kid really, like I said, he really got involved, and he was the one pushing all the other boys to put on tefillin and to daven. He was really the engine behind everything, that they had the energy behind that trip. So I said, when they look back at that letter from the Rebbe, that sometimes kedai for 1 child, so they knew who that 1 child was. That Alex, the kid Alex, that really motivated the whole group, and really was somehow a spot opened up for him in the trip. So that's just something that he shared with me. So certainly, like you're saying, Rabbi Biston, the Rebbe accompanies us throughout everything, and we have the brachas of the Rebbe, and we don't have to go anywhere. But and we have it, and but still, it's nice to have reveal answers, so the Rebbe should come back very soon, and not to be satisfied the way things are. Still shocking sometimes to hear that the Mitzvah Shem, the world's going to come back together. We'll come back to the oil. That's not what we're waiting for. Waiting for something more than that. But the Schus of Loni Chassidus, Mitreves Chassidim didn't need Mashiach. We need it very much, so it should happen. Chaim.
Shkoyach, beautiful story.
Yeah.
Beautiful story. Reminds me of Rabbi Chaim Gutnick in Australia. He tells a story that when the Rebbe spoke about Hasan Shpocha, the Rebbe told him he should make a big shturim when he goes back to Australia to make a big shurim about it. Now, what's the worst thing? If one person shows up to your class, you're stuck. You have to give the class and bizyonis. If no one shows up, at least you could say you had a great class. But anyways, one lady showed up to all of his 3 classes. The next day he came back, 2 years later, he went back to the Rebbe. He wrote to the Rebbe, like disappointed that only one lady came. So the Rebbe said, Moshe Rabbeinu only had one mother.
Yeah.
One person. We never know the one person that Alex, that kid. Yeah. The Shamus. Heiligen and Shamus.
Elam Mole.
Yeah.
One in Shama, one need is an Elam Mole.
Yeah.
Listen to Rabbi Frankfurt, Rabbi Shopiro. There's other people on the Rabbi Frankfurt. You see who's on here. Just ask someone to say a few words.
Yeah.
We don't want to compete with the Shluchim thing, but pick a name. I can't see who's on. You see who's on.
Everybody could see him with a computer.
Yeah, I'm not on a computer. I'm slow fashioned.
Yeah, with the phone, it's harder. Yeah.
Huh?
I said with the phone, it's harder.
Yeah.
But
I could go on to the participants. Let's see if I can see this.
I see there's a name Hetzliach. I don't know who you are, but maybe you want to speak.
Sounds like Rabbi Bucket.
Yeah, maybe.
The voice.
I just see Hetzliach.
Rabbi Orchman. Horav Orchman. No, Orchman. Let's get off. Unmute yourself.
We have Choshev, Moshe Kasovsky, Kasowitz, sorry, Moshe Dubinsky. We've got
I'm in the listening mode.
listening modes. Okay, we just heard you. Then we're good. The mic works.
Who's talking to Hetzliach?
I don't know.
Reitze Bilum Shmei.
If that's on his phone, that's Achenvei.
Orchman is on.
Borchman is on. Borchman has a lot of good stories.
Rabbi Zeitlin. We got a lot of people. Could Rabbi Polder.
These stories. Someone could say Avort, someone could say
Avort, no? Shemsach.
Alles an Anovim,
So we're gonna. That's what we're gonna
Blimey
do.
Diamond. Tell us the story.
We have to honor the Anovim.
Yeah. Shaila is, you know yourself.
Yaakov Brafman. Yaakov Brafman has good stories. Each word. Yisrael Noach. Horav Lipsker. Yossi Lipsker. The schus der schwer, sehr nicht ein Wort. All right.
Okay.
Let me just I'll just say, I'll finish up with a word with the Mittel Rebbe. That's the most famous, one of the most famous verses of the Mittel Rebbe is that you should talk over things with a friend, because if you have 2 people talking, you have zwei nefesh elokis, afei nefesh abamis. You have 2 nefesh elokis fighting with a nefesh abamis, so 2 against 1, your nefesh elokis will work. And everyone asks the shaila, what do you mean? Why is there only 1 nefesh abamis? There are also 2 nefesh abamis. Each yid has a nefesh abamis. What if shot 2 nefesh elokis and 1 nefesh abamis? So the lotion that it says, the answer is that in kedusha there is achdus, so the 2 go together. In klipa there is no achdus, so each one is separate. So in Mele, the 2 go together and they're fighting each one. But in Posha the pshat is that my nefesh elokis wants me to do good. He wants you to do good too. My nefesh elokis, I'll tell you, Yid wants another Yid to do good. But the nefesh abamis, there's no such thing as nefesh. My nefesh abamis wants you should do bad. The Gemara says, "Ein adam chayte v'loylay." No one doesn't avera somebody else. He should do the avera. So the nefesh elokis work together, because each one, when it comes to me, my nefesh elokis works for me. Your nefesh elokis works like for me too, trying to help me. But the nefesh abamis, It's not like that. Nefesh is each one works for himself. So you got two against one. But the bottom line is that this is something that it's kedai. This is from, just saying the word of the Mittel Rebbe, that people should, you have a chavrusa, in learning, you have a chavrusa to durchreden, that it always helps. And it gives a chizuk. It should give a chizuk to a person who, in Yonim Chassidus, Yonim of the Rebbe, Yonim, that to always have somebody that you're able to talk it through. So that's from the Mittel Rebbe. And then you're able to bring it down the Meiser. Like this is one of the more famous vetters, and I am getting the famous vetters in the Rebbe. Another thing I just want to say, this is also when I gave the Mittel Rebbe, which also it says in Sipurim Neroyin, Yankel Kadane writes there that he was once in a place, he went a lot of times in the seas with the Mittel Rebbe, came to a city, and then the Mittel Rebbe was davening, the Shamish, the Mishoras comes out to him and he says, come, you want to see how the Rebbe davens? Come, I'll show you. So he went there and they saw the Mittel Rebbe standing in the middle of the room and davening. So he says, look. So he says, you got scared. Look in the Rebbe's face, and the Rebbe is here, he's going to see me. He says, don't worry. He doesn't hear, he doesn't see, and he does this, and he could just look at these things for hours like that. And he sat there, he stood there till 3 o'clock in the morning. And was just watching, and the Mittel Rebbe didn't see. But it came 3 o'clock in the morning, and the Shoras felt the Mittel Rebbe has to eat. So he came over, tried to tap him at Afghanistan. So the Mittel Rebbe turned around, went over to the wall, and stood there for another hour. He left. He said there was nothing to see because he was facing the wall. But the next morning he said that he stood there for another hour, and then he went and he finished davening. I think he said there he was very besimcha, and he came and he served him food. Later he asked him what was so simcha here by him. So he said that I was chazering a maimer, and usually when I say a maimer, my father, the Alter Rebbe, comes to me in middle of the maimer. This time he came in the beginning of the maimer, and he came together with two more people. And the two more people were the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. And they heard the maimer, and they praised the maimer. They said that the maimer, they left, and the Alter Rebbe stayed. And the Alter Rebbe said to him that the Tata said to me that he wants me to chazer the maimer to him again. So when he went over to the wall, I think that he says that's when he was chazering the maimer again to the Alter Rebbe. So I'm just trying to bring out the what we're saying before, but negate the Mittel Rebbe. But the truth is, negate the Meifsim, we don't have to come onto the Mittel Rebbe with all the Meifsim. There was nobody who we saw Meifsim in all the Rabbeim like by the Rebbe. I remember my father told me once he heard from Shmuel of Witten. Early years after Chaysin came to the Rebbe, used to come to the Rebbe, the Dalet, as well. And he said he heard from Shmuel said that Bechlal by the Rabbeim is given Bavust, that the first year of Nesias, they did a lot of Meifsim. He says, Bam Rebbe, the Lashon, he said, it got Hatzlocha Meifsim, that it was the Meifsim where Hatzlocha Meifsim. I once heard Rebbe, Nissan Mendel, he says, Toshin Yud was a Maisa with a person that asked a bracha from the Rebbe. After he started to the Rebbe, he gave a bracha, and he was from the army or something, and he comes running into Merkaz, the Rebbe, and he's told over what happened, and he says, "You see, the Rebbe private Meifsim, the Friedrich Rebbe." So Lisa Mendel says to the Rebbe, "Or der Rebbe private Meifsim." Points, "Or der Rebbe." The Rebbe says to him, "Like a petach, you're a fool," saying that. And then Rabbi Chadok was sitting there, and he turns around and he says, "Ich halte chazei." So the Rebbe says, "Du bist a petach." You're also, but the Rebbe didn't want to attribute it to himself. But Lepeil, by the Rebbe, is, and after Gimel Tammuz that we see, that's mamish. Wherever you turn, wherever you say the things that every day you hear from different people, it's even so much that you lose count of it because it's mamish. It's like they said by the Maggid, Sagibalgit Neifsim unter den Tisch, rolled under the table. No one even bent down to pick it up because there was so much by there. But the bundle Neifsim, a lot he did more with people who are not so mamish big chassidim. Chassidim, you don't have to what they used to do. And after Gimel Tammuz. Anyway, for that part, we could say is Ashreinu Matei Chalkeinu, that we have the Rebbe. Only thing is, we have to remember that what we really want is Shuti V'Gashmi is we are people, Gashmitiki people. Mitzad the Rebbe, there is no difference. Mitzad the Rebbe, it's all the same. The Rebbe is Ishtakta V'Kuyatim B'Chayei, more he's here, his kiruv to us and is all the same. It's Mitzidena because we are Gashmitiki people. They say when Mishnah Masmin once heard where he was about the Frierdiker Rebbe, that the Frierdiker Rebbe had a stroke and you couldn't understand him talking, so he's Farbrengen the whole night. What was in the Kudah of his Farbrengen? Guck, wie grob die Welt ist geworden, und wir verstehen nicht, was der Rebbe redet. It's that the Rebbe is no difference. It's that we can't understand what the Rebbe is speaking. That's the pshat. So it's our problem that not to see. They say the Koshin Tzarmagid before his Istalkes, he told his son, you should know, I reached a madrege that this is not a goof anymore. So he said to him, Tate, but if I touch you, I feel goof. So he says, yeah, because you're touching with goof. It's your problem. You're touching with goof. But it's us. But sof it's us. We are Gashmiziki people, and so that's why we hope and pray, and we're sure that very, very soon Mashiach will come, and we'll see the Rebbe again, and what will be then? In the Shem Eisen, the Zalman Duchma writes that the Isaac Homler said that Mashiach will come, jeder einer geht zum Moshe Rabbeinu, denkt this, ich will gehen zum Rebbe. I'm going to go to the Rebbe. Tell him, you guys can do whatever you want. Ich will gehen zum Rebbe. I, Moshe Rabbeinu. So on this, I think it's on this that the Rebbe makes a ha'orah. I didn't see it now. They reprinted the Shem Eisen. I remember it from when the Shem Eisen came out, 55 years ago. I remember that there's a order from the Rebbe there on his because he gave him the ksovim to the Rebbe before he printed. The Rebbe writes, Re'ei, say that Hadeiris, the famous story with the Rabbi Natam and Moshe Rabbeinu. There was a machlekes that Rabbi Natam had with other Rabbonim about the film, not the regular Rabbi Natam's film, about the kesher. And they said different than him. And he said to them, I'll prove you I'm right. I'm going to bring down Moshe Rabbeinu. So he brought down Moshe Rabbeinu. And they asked him, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, not like Rabbi Natam. So Rabbi Natam says to Moshe, Moshe to'iso. You made a mistake. So it brings it, in other words, even to Moshe Rabbeinu, but the Rebbe, in other words, that's, Moshe Rabbeinu has two hats. He doesn't explain it like that. Moshe Rabbeinu has the Kabbalah table. Whatever the Eibush gave him, that's Moshe Rabbeinu. No one could argue. No. But then to understand it, to learn, that's Teisha Mapeh, that the Chachamim had the Klolim, and with the Klolim they figured out. So Moshe Rabbeinu could figure it out, and the other Chachamim could figure it out. So, B'meila, that's what he said. I'll go to the Rebbe. Anyone can go Moshe Rabbeinu, but our Shaykhis is the Rebbe. So, Mashiach will come, and we'll be back. We'll see the Rebbe. It should be very, very soon. The nest of the Rebbe, the seeing the Rebbe now, you see, because these kashas of the Chassidim, and the people who never saw the Rebbe, were born after Gibel Tammuz, and born, people are, Bochim are 17 years old now, who were born not only after Gibel Tammuz, many years after Gibel Tammuz. And the Iskashers, I think the Yeshiva by us, the Bochim that they talk, like Bochim has spoken in the Chofs, but the Rebbe and the where does it come from? It's a Peledig Gezach. This is a way to show the Keiches of the Rebbe. Anyway, but it's all good and fine. But you know, it's not good and fine. You have to see the Rebbe Bein Abosir Begashmi is very, very soon.